everyone. I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour. I hope that you had a wonderful holiday and are ready to take your cameras on some new adventures. Every Wednesday, we meet here to connect, inspire, and create with the help of a guest speaker that shares their images, stories of inspiration, and helpful tips and techniques to help you improve your photography skills. The schedule for upcoming presentations is on my website at lindanickell.com. And under Happiness Hour, you'll find the links to previous sessions on my YouTube channel. Tonight's guest is Russell Graves. Russell is a Texas-based editorial and commercial photographer who sold his first image at the age of 19, and he hasn't stopped working since then. If you've opened a Texas magazine, then chances are you've seen some of his photos or read some of his words. Russell's many projects include filming and producing a documentary, working with celebrities like Dale Earnhardt Jr. and musician Pat Green on their marketing projects. But his favorite subjects are the regular people that he's met across the country. And he is in his spare time, he guides and leads photo tours, and he's learning to play the guitar. So he's a man with many, many talents. In tonight's presentation, Curating the Local Story, Russell's going to talk about how you can discover good stories in your own backyard. And he'll share some tips to help you improve and develop your own storytelling style. If you're on Instagram, you can find him at Russell Graves, or you can reach out to him through his website at russellgraves.com. Welcome back to the Happiness Hour, Russell.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
Yay!
I got to clarify one thing you said, though.
Okay, clarify.
I can play the guitar. I'm just trying to take lessons to get better at playing the guitar.
Oh, okay.
I've been playing for 30 years, so I'm trying to transition to my next career, which is going to be a bluegrass star.
Well, why not? Why not? I'm one of these people that I don't have any musical talent except, in my own privacy of my own home. But I'm very envious of that. And a while ago, you leaned over and I could actually see your guitar. So
yeah, there it is.
Yeah, you're a little serious about it. So
Yeah.
Good for you. All right. Well, next time you come, maybe you can play the guitar for us.
Oh, I'd love to. and one thing too, you said a couple of things in the introduction. One was I sold my first picture to a magazine when I was 19 years old, and that's exactly correct. But I want everybody to know I'm only 26 years old right now. This is what the photography business has done to me.
That's not true, because I think you accidentally told me your age one time, and I was like, wow. I
am 53 is how old I am.
You're puppy.
In fact, if you look at Facebook, I found a picture today when I was a little kid. So look at my Facebook page and you see a picture of me when I was a baby as a family picture. I'm the youngest of 5 kids. So I've got 2 older brothers and 2 older sisters. And so there's a picture in early 1970 that was taken. I was probably 3 or 4 months old. And it's me, mom and dad. And you ought to see the looks on mom and dad's faces when they've got all of those 5 little kids that they've got to raise and send off to the world. But my mom and dad are still doing good. They're still alive. In fact, I was telling you earlier, I had to go run a cutting torch today and cut up some metal for my dad. They live a mile away from me. The farm I live on, and I'll tell that a little more in my introduction, is a farm that's been in my family for 50 something years, but I bought it 3 years ago and we built a house here, and it's a mile from where I grew up. So I'm all about local stuff and just love being here back at home where I was raised.
And I think you said is Dodge City?
Yeah. So do you want me to share my screen and get started on the presentation?
Let's get started. Sure.
Okay. This is probably, my apologies to you and everybody else. I'm probably not nearly as formal as what your other guests are when y'all do this.
I don't need you to be formal.
I am who I am because everybody else is taken. So here we go. Really, you're going to ask where I'm from, and I'm from Dodge City, Texas. If you want to look on the map, It's in Northeast Texas. It's a little town northeast of Dallas near the Red River. The name of my farm here is called Hackberry Farm. There's a big hackberry tree that sits right in the middle of a field that has an old well by it, and there used to be an old home place. In fact, I found today, I was doing a little research for another project I was working on, and I found a 1936 Texas county road map that shows where the old house used to be exactly on this place. So I've got some metal detecting I want to do at some point to see if I can find any artifacts from the old house that used to be there. But growing up, like I said, I grew up, my home place is a mile from here where my parents still live, a mile north of here. But growing up, and I'd always come down on this place. It was a hay farm, and we'd always throw stuff down in that well or try to catch frogs out of that well. So this is really neat being back home. But Linda, one of the things that I learned early on, I started taking pictures when I was young. I mean, I was 16 years old when my brother gave me a camera. My older brother joined the Army, and he is, let me think, I was born in 69. He was born in 64, so he's 5 years older than I am. So yeah, he was probably in his early 20s. I was probably 16, and he was in the Army and got stationed in Alaska. And our oldest sister had given him a camera to take with him when he started traveling in the Army. And so he loved photography so much, he bought a new camera, gave me that old camera. And when he did, I fell in love with photography at a young age. But early on, you know, I'm a country kid of limited means. If we wanted to travel when I was a kid, I could either travel on a bicycle or my 2 feet, as far as that would take me. So I spent an awful lot of time roaming the woods and the creeks and the hillsides of the area where I live now. And so early on, I just learned that there's a lot of good stories just right around my back door if I just take the time to look. And I think just because, you know, I wasn't, as a young photographer, you know, and I say this, teaching workshops, I've had an opportunity to meet a lot of fantastic people from all over the country and over parts of the world, and just love the clients I get to serve. And every now and then, most of the time, I'm the youngest one on the trips. But sometimes a young person will come along with their parents. My son's one of them. He's had the benefit of learning photography from me and getting to go some really cool places. But growing up, I didn't have that opportunity. Not that my parents didn't love me, but we just, you know, didn't travel. I mean, I come from blue collar people, and my dad was a welder by trade, and that was back in the days when welders didn't rule the world like they do now. And so, you know, we were from an income standpoint, I came from a modest background, and so I learned early on, even before I picked up a camera, just to explore and learn about everything there is around me and really understand and put things in context, everything around me. So I feel like one of the advantages I had early on was being able to recognize the beauty that surrounds us every day. You know, whether it's that beauty comes in the form of nature, or whether it comes in the form of some local story to be told, or whether it's the people that are all around you. So tonight, and I encourage as much as we can, I want this to be a dialogue and not a monologue. If anyone has any questions, feel free to chime in to Linda, and you'll relay the questions, correct? Or do I need to be on the lookout for them?
No. I'll watch for the questions.
Yeah, so feel free to ask any questions. It can be, you know, sort of my approach, or it could be asking more questions about a picture that I'm going to show you, because really what I'm going to teach you tonight, or what I'm going to talk about tonight, is not rocket science. You know, we're not trying to send someone to Mars. It's really kind of basic common sense stuff, but I'm going to talk you through some pictures, tell you about a few pictures, and really just talk about sort of my approach to how it goes from how things go from an idea all the way to, and I'll show you an example of how I ended up, one local story ended up being in a magazine a few years ago. This was a really good example of something in my own backyard that I'd been by a million times in my life, and I knew it had a story to tell. And I finally got off my rear and figured out what that story was. And so the first thing that I learned to do early on is look for interesting people. And the cool thing is that, and by the way, all these pictures you're seeing tonight are all going to have a rural slant to it, because I lived for 23 years, like I said, north of where I live now. And then when I got out of college at East Texas State University, I moved to Childress, Texas, which is north of Paducah, 30 miles away from Paducah, and lived there for 26 years. And I've lived back here now. So my whole life and my whole approach to photography has always really been about telling rural stories. I'm a rural person and a rural Texan, and love people that live out in the country or live in small towns, and so that's where my interest has always gravitated. And so all the pictures you'll see tonight, you'll see a lot of cowboys and some farmers and stuff like that. You'll see rural people, but these stories we're talking about aren't just relegated to rural places. So if you live in an urban area, there's probably even more stories there. So one of the first things I do is I look for interesting people to try to feature, like the mom and son in the upper right. They own one of the largest wholesale nurseries in this part of Texas, and to be able to help tell their story to a broader audience for a magazine was great. And the one thing all these people have in common is just hardworking people. Or Dean Price at the bottom right, he built a raft and floated the Red River from Lake Texoma Dam all the way to Shreveport, Louisiana, just to see if he could do it. And so when you start kind of being on the lookout, and it's a little easier now to do, I think, because of Facebook, because now it's as easy as just getting on Facebook and saying, hey, y'all know any interesting characters that live in your area? There's no shortage of people who are willing to give you leads on places. But early on, I just started asking questions, talking to local museums, talking to people I knew, and it would just good old investigative or reporting work, and it would eventually lead me to people that were interesting in their own right. They may not be doing anything monumental or super interesting, but they like my friend Chris Reister on the left there. He works on a ranch out in West Texas, but he's college educated, but he's like me. All he ever wanted to do is turn around and go back to the country and live the kind of rural lifestyle like he was raised in. And so once you start hearing stories like people, everybody has a story. And once you start hearing stories of people like that, then you understand why they've got something interesting to say if you'll just listen. And so one of the things I encourage people to do when you're looking for stories is just listen to what people say. And some of these stories may not rise to the level of being the cover story for a magazine, but it may lead you into something different. And I'm talking a lot of generalities tonight because I don't know everybody in the audience, and I don't know exactly where their interests lie. But when I started shooting pictures for magazines, it was really my personal projects that led me in that direction and kind of helped me just hone my skills to be able to do more and more magazine work and then commercial work over time. And it's just trying to pick a topic and then stick with that topic and tell everything there is to tell about that story. Stories are made up of a beginning, a middle, and an end. Every story we ever tell are made up of the three basic things. But the thing that matters about stories the most are the details in the story. And so as I start talking to people and I start finding out details about, what drives them or what makes them interesting, and trying to figure out all those things, then the story becomes interesting, maybe not to a universal audience, but maybe it's something that's worth telling in a local setting or for a photography group slideshow or something like that. So a lot of these pictures that I'm showing you individual to people end up being a broader story that I told for some magazine or some other kind of medium on the way out. Like this lady on the left, Mary Jane Rep, she was a metal artist from Oklahoma. That was a story that I worked on for a magazine a few years ago. And what you can't see, that this was lit using studio strobes, but what you can't see is I wanted some sparks in the background to kind of illustrate that's a metal shop. And I had a guy behind the door with a grinder on a piece of metal, making sparks back there. Or I'm going blank on the guy's name playing the fiddle, but he's a luthier. He used to be a fiddle player in Robert Earl Keen's band. And but he had got I was introduced to him by someone else, but he's got a little violin shop in downtown New Braunfels. Start talking to him and hear about his life and what all he did. And I didn't know he used to be a professional musician and traveled with Robert Earl Keen. But once you start talking to him and you realize and you hear the story that he had to tell me about how he loved being a professional musician and traveling, but in the end, all he wanted to do is stay home and raise cows. And so I thought his story was pretty intriguing there. And so really the next thing I do is, I look for interesting places. Just like people have a story to tell, the places have a story to tell as well. Today, I wish I could share it. What's fascinating today, and I'm always looking for leads like this, but today I found, like I said earlier, I found a 1936 map of the county where I live now. And it was just fascinating to look at where the county roads used to be and where all the old churches used to be and all the old schools, when every little country road had a school down it. I'm doing that research for a personal project, but it'll probably turn into a larger project, because one of the things that I hope to start doing this spring is my family takes care of a rural cemetery that's just right down the road from my house. It's called Hildreth Cemetery. It's a beautiful old cemetery. It's got 250-year-old oak trees in it. The earliest person buried in it was born in the 1700s. So the survey, when you look at the land survey, and the creek that runs through my property is called Onstott Creek, and the William Onstott that settled this whole area, he's buried in that cemetery. But the one thing that cemetery lacks is when people are buried there, they just got to stand out and open. So one of the things that me and my brothers hope to do this spring is build a chapel. We want to build a chapel in the spirit. If you've ever been to Cades Cove and Smoky Mountains and see those old one-room chapels there, we're going to build one like that on the cemetery grounds, so families will have a place to get out of the weather when they lay their loved ones to rest over in that cemetery. And it's not like a lot of people are buried there, but I think it's important enough to be able to put something like there and do my part, because again, my family's maintained that cemetery. My dad's done it for, my dad is 80, just turned 84 back in November. He still works on it. He's been doing it for probably the past 35 or 40 years. And then my brothers helped him along the way when I didn't live here. And now that we do live here, my son is kind of taking that over now. He helps my dad take care of it, keep it mowed and keep it weed eated around the gravestones, and just keep it up perpetually for no charge for just the families who have loved ones buried there. But we're going to build that chapel there. Well, that not that I'm self-aggrandizing when I say this, but just because that chapel is going to be there, it's going to be one of a kind in this county to have an old chapel that's modeled after the one that used to sit there back in the 1930s. And all of a sudden we've created an interesting place with an interesting story just right down the road from my house. But as you drive around, and I do this a lot, and I use my iPhone a lot to document places like this, because I know the modern cameras will do it, but it's so easy to use an app like Hipstamatic, and I love that app, and do like an old vintage camera setting on it. These aren't Hipstamatic pictures, but I'll find places like this old cobblestone old gas station that's in Medicine Mound, Texas, out in the Texas Rolling Plains, and we'll start kind of keeping a library. The cool thing about using a smartphone is it geotags the images, and it's real easy, at least on a Mac, and using the iPhone to be able to go back and look at where all your pictures are taken. I know my mirrorless cameras will have GPS in them, but they tend to use a lot of batteries when I have that GPS turned on, so I keep that GPS turned off. But it's also understanding a place like the picture of the center pivot irrigation in the upper right over the cotton field. I saw that during the day and knew where the sun would come up the next morning, and I just recorded it with my phone to try to visualize what it looked like, and I went back. And so or this old church like we just mentioned, and there's another old church out in New Mexico, Taban, New Mexico is where that old church is. And it's just really cool to see places like that and start documenting interesting places. I'm going back to this place tomorrow. I found this on a little road trip I was doing in far East Texas, in this Jonesville Country Store. It's an old general store that has been open for, I think, 117 years, and it's still open. And it's so cool when you go inside that place. I found it when I was with a photography workshop. We went back and photographed it, but I was telling my wife about it, and so she wants to see it. And so we're going to go back over there tomorrow morning, and I want to go show her that store and how cool of a place that is. And I've met the proprietor, and I've met the owner, and just the stories that he knows about the area. All of a sudden you start making those connections about to put in a place with the people and the people that live there. And it's all of a sudden you start seeing these stories come together. when you can connect all these places. That's on the left, that's in the store, some of the old pictures. That's one of my hipstamatic pictures I took. Or an interesting place that's out in the middle of nowhere that people don't even think about was during the heyday of the cattle drives in the upper right, that old one-room store is called Doan's Store. Now that place, the building's still there, but the place isn't open anymore. But that's where the Western Trail used to cross the Red River in Texas. And so millions of head of cattle, when Texas, the Berta Hart Nance poem starts out, other states were carved and born, but Texas grew from hides and horns. And it's a place like that where the myth of Texas began, because even though Texas just eclipsed 30 million people, I think when Texans think about themselves and when other people think about Texans, we think about the days of the cattle drive and the days of Lonesome Dove, or just the rugged individualism that these people had to endure just to survive Texas back then. And this was the place where millions of cattle were driven from South Texas up to the markets in Kansas, and they crossed the river right behind that store. And just to find places like that, and that are just there, you won't ever find them on the map. A lot of it just takes roaming the back roads and paying attention to your surroundings and doing a little advanced research, and you find places like that. And the bottom picture, that's my wife. Every time we find a cool old store, we like going in on that. That's her shopping in a place a couple years ago. And I like documenting those old homes where, because if you go out to Texas Rolling Plains, we mentioned it before the show started, Linda, that a lot of those towns in the Texas Rolling Plains, like Memphis or Allen, you'd mentioned Turkey or Paducah, or a lot of those places are just depopulating. They're one of the few places in Texas that more people are leaving those areas than are coming in. And a lot of the places like this old farmstead, that place is no longer there. And so one of the reasons I try to take pictures all the time is not only tell a contemporary story, but be able to, over time, be able to tell us the way the story used to be. I have these profound thoughts that really lead me nowhere, but I had this thought a couple days ago when I was trying to organize my images after getting behind on it. And I finally finished it up, all my image organization, after putting it off for a while. But I've got 750,000 images in my library, and those 750,000 images will show a snapshot of what it was like to be a rural Texan during my lifetime. Not that that's going to be museum worthy or worth anything beyond value to me and my family, but the fact that it's there is a lasting testament to what the places I spent my life around looks like. And I think for that reason, for posterity's sake, I think for that reason, whether it's me or anyone here listening tonight, that's reason enough just to get out and try to find those stories and try to take pictures, and really with the mindset that you don't have to travel far to do it. They're really all in your own backyard. And so once I find interesting people in interesting places, then I start looking for common threads between them. Are there any questions so far, Linda, do I need to answer?
Nope, not at all.
That's why I was the teacher so long. I'm good at explaining things. No one ever has any questions. Either that or I'm talking such nonsense. Everyone's tuned out. So
tuned out.
Yeah, I'm not sure what it is. And so the next thing I do is I find common threads. I mentioned earlier, some of the leads that you get just are kind of interesting stories on their own, but every now and then you find a common thread that all of a sudden you realize that, hey, this is a story that may have bigger implications than what I really understood. And when the light bulb goes off for me, and it's something that's pretty local, man, that's a magical moment. I love being able to find those common threads and being able to figure out sort of the broader story to tell. And give you an example of this, and this is a real world example, and I'll show you some pictures from this series. Now, these pictures, these are cropped for this presentation I'm giving. So the original pictures are in the standard 4:3 ratio, like we all take with our cameras. But right down the road from me, and growing up, I passed it a million times, and this place is about 20 miles east of where I live right now. And there's a historical marker when you pass by is a place called the Smiley Woodfin Prairie. And it was just a big grass field that really didn't mean anything to me growing up. But as I got older, I stopped one day and I read the historical marker, and it said something interesting. It's the largest patch of tall grass prairie that's never been plowed in Texas. And I kind of kept that in the back of my mind. Well, this was probably 20 years ago. One magazine came around, it was an ag magazine. They said, "You got any good stories to tell around there?" And so I pitched them 2 or 3 ideas, and I ended up doing one story on the prairie, but it's from more of an agricultural standpoint, because they, even though they didn't plow it, it was still a source of hay for the area. I remember when I was working on that story, it was, long before drones came out, and this is where scouting and knowing the area really comes into play. But as long before drones came out, and I kept thinking to myself that, man, I wish I knew someone with an airplane so I could get some aerial pictures of this big expanse of a prairie. Because you're talking about this big prairie in a part of Texas that, I mean, you're 2 miles away from where the pine belt starts in Texas, where this prairie is. And if you go a little bit further north, it's where all the post oak savanna begins. So this is a part of Texas where this is the last vestige of the prairies in Texas, where before all the trees begin. And so I thought it'd be cool to get some aerial shots of the prairie. And so I remembered, because I'd seen it before, there used to be a museum right like about 2 or 3 miles away from this place called the Flying Tigers Air Museum. And I remember when I was a little kid, I used to get my dad to stop there every now and then, because they had some old vintage planes sitting out front. Well, the Air Museum was gone because it's just a private collection of airplanes, but the old airstrip in the hangar was still there. So I thought, I'm going to go find out who flies planes. So I drove up to the hangar, and there's a guy in there working on a plane. And I said, "Hey, could I hire you to fly me around for 15 or 20 minutes?" And, this is, I'm like 28, 29 years old. I'm a whole lot of dumb still at that point. And he says, "Well," true story, by the way. He says, "Well, I'm just the mechanic." He said, "The pilot lives up in the old gas station by the road. And so there's an old service station up by the highway." So I drove back down the grass airstrip and then went up to the gas station. And, it's typical 1970s style gas station. And with the awning still out front, and the old gas pumps weren't there. So I parked on the awning, walked up, as well as old glass fronted gas stations, but all the glass was blacked out. So I knocked on the door. I mean, this is like 9 a.m, I think, Linda. So I knocked on the door, and this dude comes to the door, and he's wearing, his hair's messed up. I obviously just now woke him up for the day. And this is on a Saturday, by the way, because I was teaching, and there's the only time I could work on these stories on weekends. And hair was messed up. He was wiping the sleep from his eyes until he just woke up, and he was wearing nothing but his tidy whities. And I was like, wow, I was kind of taken back by it. And he's like, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Yeah, I was told that the pilot lives here." And he's like, "Oh, that's me." And I'm like, "Well," told him what I wanted. "Yeah, let's go get in the plane." So we went back to the hangar. He got dressed, went back to the hangar. And I never once thought, I wonder if this guy can even fly good. I just took his word for it. He was a pilot. But we took off, and the flight was uneventful. I took my pictures. That was back during the time of slide films, before I was even using digital cameras. But anyway, we got the pictures. The story appeared in a magazine called The Furrow, and The Furrow is a magazine that's produced by John Deere. John Deere has 2 or 3 internal magazines that they produce, and so it was for that magazine. Well, the whole story of that prairie still kind of stuck with me, because after I've been to that one, I learned, and this is all part about making the connections. I'd learned that there was another prairie called the Trident's Prairie just right down the road, and I think it's owned by a private foundation. And then in Collin County, where McKinney and Plano and that whole bird booming area of Texas, there's another prairie down there called the Park Hill Prairie, and it's a nature conservancy property. So then I start thinking, well, maybe these blackland prairies do mean something. And so there's probably a broader story to tell from just an agricultural use. And so that's when Texas Parks and Wildlife gave me the green light to do that story for them. And so, really my approach, and I'd mentioned earlier that Stories have beginning, middle, and end, and then but the stories are told with details. And I certainly give a lot of details when I tell stories orally or whether I write stories. But the thing is, how do you tell stories with pictures that give the details in the way that you want it presented? And the way I've come up with, and the best way I know to explain it, is if you watch any movie or any TV show, if you think back at anyone you've ever seen, they're made up of three main shots. The professional cinematographers who tell stories for a living, every movie, every TV show is shot with three main shots. It's a wide shot, it's a mid-range shot, and it's a close-up shot. And it just depends. The sequence in which those pictures are laid out help convey not only the story that you're hearing the actors talk about, but also convey it visually to people so people can understand the story. Well, still pictures are no different. So every time I go out and when I start making those connections and trying to figure out all the facets of what makes a good story and why the story will be good, and I want to document it with my camera, I think in the same things. I think I've got to get wide angle shots, I got to get close-up shots, I got to get mid-range shots. And so right here is kind of an example of all three of them. Even though the top right one technically is a wide angle, I call it a mid-range because I wanted to get close to one of those hay bales that were baled out of these fields and be able to shoot just kind of a wider shot. So I spent about 6 months that year working on a story about the prairies and why they're important to Texas and why, they're a good thing and should be conserved. And so it's visually, I think it turned out to be a beautiful story in the magazine. And this picture here was a little patch of native grass prairie that's just right next to the cemetery where I was just talking about. So that's where that picture was taken. And that's a friend of mine. I graduated with, this is his dad. I graduated with this man's son. We graduated high school together, but just be able to incorporate all the local people I knew, because all of a sudden I knew the people that locally that were doing interesting things. I knew the interesting places, and I started making the connections between all of this and was able to tell a complete and full story for the magazine about all the facets of the prairies of this part of Texas. You get to West Texas, there's plenty of prairie, but in this part of Texas, it's either developed or it's plowed for the most part. And so what's left are little, small, tiny pieces of what used to be a vast ecosystem that stretched from South Texas all the way to Canada and the tall grass. If you think about the United States going east to west, you're getting the big hardwoods. You're in the big hardwoods, or on the big trees. And then if you go from east to west, the trees progressively get smaller. Then all of a sudden, a little bit west of the Mississippi River, the trees stop and it becomes tall grass prairie first, because they get enough rain for the tall grasses. And the further west you go, it becomes short grass prairie like Floydada or around Lubbock, Amarillo's traditional short grass prairie. And then that short grass prairie eventually succumbs into the really short grass prairie, then becomes the scrub desert after that. And so just this little bitty narrow strip of habitat that's left, and to be able to document what of it was left in Texas was really a nice little project to work on. And so that's what I mean about building connections. And so I spent 6 months. This was on that prairie in Collin County, because I timed it perfectly. When I started working on the story, I found out, because the connections I made, found out that they were going to do a prescribed burn. So I went and spent the morning with those guys when they were burning the dead grass and trying to stimulate the seeds that are in the seed bank to regerminate. So they burn for two reasons. One, to fight, because fire in the ecosystem is a natural process. And so when they burn, they fight back invasive plants that are trying to creep into the prairie. And then it also helps stimulate seeds that are in the seed bank to germinate and come back, because once they burn, it creates a little bit of a different ecosystem temporarily, and it ushers in a new plants, and it helps keep the existing grasses and forbs there even stronger. And so that was a neat part of it. And I think that's the picture of it's wild carrot. There's the plant that's there that goes by another name, but I'm going blank on it for a second. But that's the sun coming up over the prairie one morning. And so that story, I'm going to switch screens right quick. That story, yeah. So this is the story that came out on that, and this is just one example of maybe hundreds I've done in my lifetime. But as I was thinking, this was a good example of just of knowing where something was, and it just took a while to kind of connect all the dots and really see the bigger picture in the story for what it was. And this is the web posted version, but it came out in the February 2015 in print. And to me, I understand that web versions are what people do nowadays, but to me, a story presented like this will never look as good as what one presented on pages will look. And so, but anyway, here's the story and photos by Russell Graves. And so that's just the story I tell about the prairies. And then, just there's the Smiley Woodfin Prairie there, and tells a little bit about what's happened to the prairies across the continent and why it's important. And that's one of the detail shots I was talking about. That's just a backlit just a little tiny detail in nature that people drive by a billion times a day. But if you stop and take the look, you inherently see the beauty within there. And then this talks about the pieces that are still protected and the people that are trying to protect it. So really, this is a story not just about a place. It's also a story about an ecosystem. It's also a story about the plants and animals therein. It's also a story about people, because it takes people to kind of take care of and steward all this stuff, with the way we do things these days. And so it's really all those pieces into one. And that's where I'm talking about. You meet interesting people, you find interesting places, and then you make the connections between all of them. And all of a sudden you'll start seeing stories that appear over time. And just to be able to, if you got the wherewithal and are looking to write stories for magazines or photograph stories for magazine, that's one thing. But the same model still applies if you don't care anything about that. If you just want to document a piece of your life for your kids or your grandkids or whatever, or document a piece of life for people that you care a lot about, that have an interesting story to tell. The beautiful thing about the technology these days is all the mediums that you can have it put into a book yourself. You can have your own website built. You can do all kinds of things to present these stories. But the key thing in my mind is just having the presence of mind just to be able to connect those stories. And that's, I know the slides I showed tonight, it seems awfully simplistic in the way I do it, but that's exactly the way I do it. It's like I showed you. And so I think at that, does anybody have any questions so far? I've been rambling on for 45 minutes now, believe it or not.
That's because you're captivating. I have no questions from anybody. I'll double check.
Yes, my beard is real, in case anybody's wondering. I know that's probably one of the questions. It's kind of, I don't see anybody's faces but yours, Linda. So, and feel free to edit this out if you want to. Can I just confide in something with you?
Sure. I love secrets.
I'm constantly having to remind my wife that, hey, Christy, my eyes are up here, because she's always wanting to look at my beard and objectify it.
I cannot. I hope that you bring her in March, because I'd love to meet her.
Oh, she's coming. I hope she's not listening to me right now, because she'll kill me for saying something like that.
I'll let her know. So do you have more? Because I do have a question, but I think I want to hold it to the end.
Well, I just have my contact information if anybody wants to stay in touch, but no, I mean, go ahead and ask. Okay,
so go ahead and take down your screen then. My question for you as a photographer and a writer and a storyteller, searcher, is there a story that you've been pitching and you can't find someone to publish it, that you really just know it needs to be told?
Yeah, there is one, and I haven't pitched it in a while, but actually, believe it or not, it's on my list of things to try to get done pretty soon. I think there's and really, I think it needs to be told 2 or 3 ways, or not just in 2 or 3 ways, in total 2 or 3 ways.
Okay.
And that story is where I used to live in the Rolling Plains. It's a fantastic patch of Texas. It's a fantastic piece of the country. It's got all kinds of history behind it. But like I mentioned before, sadly, a lot of it's just turned into ghost towns. And I pitched the idea of doing the story to a couple of magazines about that area and really it's just full of towns that are too tough to die. And so really trying to flesh it down and to tell the story about the rolling plains. But the 2 or 3 ways I think it needs to be told is I want to tell it in magazine form. I probably want to tell it in book form too, because I have written a bunch of books and I'd love to be able to produce a documentary about it. But the documentary, even though I can do it, it's a lot harder to get done, because even though you can produce a documentary, you got to have someplace beyond YouTube to show that documentary.
Right.
Because even though YouTube's popular, I think people still like to watch stuff on TV to give it credibility. So it would involve me trying to learn that, because my one contact, the one documentary I've ever done that I produced for national television, was aired and it was successful, but that and I hope that I wasn't the one that caused this, but that channel got folded into another channel and it no longer exists. So I lost all my contacts there. And I haven't just tried to rebuild it yet, because I stay pretty busy. I mean, the whole TV industry is not the core of what I do. It was just a good diversion to be able to do a separate project. But to answer your question directly, that's one in particular that I think that I'd love to work on, kind of a National Geographic style story about the people and the place that's the Texas Rolling Plains. So.
Well, there's some people in this room that are up in the plains area of the Panhandle. I don't know if that's kind of that area, but
it's kind of close. So I noticed someone here is from Amarillo.
yeah.
If you get to like Amarillo and Floydada, that's the high plains. That's
Okay.
above the cap, or above the cap rock, as they say out there. So the rolling plains is that country, kind of, descriptions vary, but it's kind of the wedge of land from like Wichita Falls to Abilene over to Snyder and north,
Okay.
along the Red River up through Childress, Guthrie, Paducah, Wellington.
How many times can we say the word Paducah in this?
Matador.
Okay.
Paducah's trending. It's probably been said, the word's been said tonight more than it has in a long time. So all those places, that's kind of the, and it'll happen one day. When you work in the business, things are cyclical. You hear a no about a project and it may not be no forever. It's just no today because it doesn't fit whatever their idea of their editorial schedule is for that particular year. And so you just got to keep pitching, keep pitching, keep pitching. It's just like, think about how many times did you look at smart fixtures before you finally bought them?
For like 20 minutes.
Oh, okay.
I'm like the worst.
You got suckered pretty quick.
Well, yeah.
If you think, I don't know, I think it's pretty typical of people's buying habits, where people look at stuff a bunch of times before they finally commit to say, okay, I'm going to buy this or whatever. They don't just, unless you're Linda, you don't just go and splurge on something without, but you'd seen them before. That's my point.
No, I hadn't.
You'd never seen it before.
I didn't even know. No, I walked into someone's house and they said, Alexa, turn on the lights, and the light went on. And went, what just happened? Oops. So now she's talking to me.
Anyway, so that's the way it is when you work with a bunch of editorial outlets like I do. Is you just, it's again, it may not be no forever. It's just no right now. And so you give it a little time and you pitch it again, or it may be no to that person. I've said this before, and I don't mean this disparagingly, but the magazine people I work with, you watch movies like The Devil Wears Prada, and they make magazine work look so glamorous. And maybe it is when you work in New York City for Vogue, but most of the magazines I work for, good people work for those magazines, but they're like factory workers. They're just trying to build one widget, get it out the door so they can start working on the next widget.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times those people, or like anywhere else in the workplace, they may work at a place for 5 or 6 years and then move on to whatever other opportunity. And so a lot of times it's just when one person leaves, you pitch it to the next person and they're like, oh yeah, that's the greatest idea I've ever heard. So all that stuff's cyclical. So that whole story I told you about the rolling plains, it'll happen one day. It's just got to find the right place and the right person.
Well, Ashley Campbell, you're up in that area. If you know anybody, whisper in somebody's ear. I do. I'm going to hang on to what you just said. It may be no today, but it's not no forever. And I love that. I'm going to be using that to pitch stuff for myself, my personal use.
Yeah.
Susan is curious, what did you teach?
Agricultural science.
What does that mean?
I taught about the science of agriculture. It's ag.
Ag.
I was ag teacher.
Okay.
And ag and FFA and all that stuff that, not only in Texas, not only small schools do it, but the biggest programs of the state are suburban programs, like in San Antonio or the Dallas and Fort Worth areas.
Okay.
And yeah, those are like, I'm trying to think of like San Antonio Northwest ISD, San Antonio. They're some of the biggest programs in Texas, but it was a good program, and I did that for 16 years and loved it. I just ran out of gas. In fact, at the end of this year, Linda, this will be the year that I end up being out of teaching as long as I was in teaching. So if I was still teaching, this would be the year I would have retired from teaching.
Wow.
But God made windshields bigger than rear view mirrors for a reason. I don't look back. I made my decision in 2009, and that's the decision I made, and I've been happy ever since.
Rolling with it. All right, Russell, I don't see any questions in here. I'm kind of surprised by that. Take a minute and tell us about some of the workshops that you guide. Do you have anything coming up on the calendar?
Yeah, I contract with a company called Backcountry Journeys, and I do some private workshops on my own from time to time. But I contract with a company called Backcountry Journeys, and I'm doing a couple of trips for them. One is winter in Yellowstone coming up this month.
Okay.
And then I'll be back from there a week, and then I go to do another one called Birds and Wildlife of the Florida Everglades after that.
Okay.
In early February. And then, got one coming up in the Smokies. This spring's going to be kind of slow for me in regards to doing those trips, just because my son is graduating from high school, and this is his last year to play baseball and last of everything. So I'm going to be try to stay close to home. And then after that, I'm going to Botswana for a couple of weeks, and I'm taking him with me to go over there. So I'm going to lead a workshop in Botswana.
Excellent. I just had something that just went out of my head. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Spoiler alert, Russell has agreed to come and do in March, on Saturday, March 18th this year at the Georgetown, Texas Photography Festival. We're going to do another live happiness hour, and Russell, I don't know why he said yes, but he said yes. So he's going to be one of my speakers. So
because I'm the entire photography enthusiast community of Dodge City, Texas.
And you're representing.
And if I get a chance to go talk photography with other people, I'm going to go do it. I'm a sucker for that.
I'm so excited that you're coming. So if anybody's in the Austin metropolitan area or willing to drive from Dallas, because Russell's coming from North Texas, so drive a couple hours. It'll be a great day of fun stuff. Thank you, Russell, for doing this for me again. And I will see you in March. You guys can connect with Russell on Instagram at Russell Graves and through his website, russellgraves.com.
Hey, can I throw one more thing out there?
Of course.
I do a really cool, and consider the source when I say cool. I do a cool monthly newsletter. If you're interested in, if you'll go, it's free.
Yep.
And if you go to wildlifephotoshow.com, you can sign up for that. And I do monthly webinars myself where I'll teach you about, Lightroom and all kinds of different photography stuff. You can sign up for that. Sign up for you'll get notification of the not only the webinars I do, but also, if I'm going to be speaking somewhere where you can come hear me, like the one in Georgetown.
Yeah. I want you to do a do-over for your Lightroom. You did something on a catalog and you were having technical issues that day and it didn't take, so I wasn't able to watch it.
Oh, yeah, that was yeah. I did redo that. And if you're to sign up for a newsletter, you'd have saw that came up.
I think I am signed up for your
Oh,
newsletter.
you just didn't sign up. I'm just giving you a hard time.
I did. Yeah. I also don't read. So that's
Well, that's another thing. So
part
if
of
you
the
go,
problem.
if you go back, if you go back and you go, if you go on YouTube and go to Wildlife Photo Show, which all that stuff connects to
Mhm.
the newsletter. All those webinars get reposted on my YouTube page, so you can go back and watch them. And the one you're talking about was managing your digital photo library.
Yes.
Yeah, and that was the one I did in, I think, November. And so, but it's on YouTube, right? It's on the YouTube
Is
channel
it?
right now.
Okay, I'll go
And
back.
it's Wildlife Photo Show too.
Okay. All right. With that, I'm going to close you out. Thank you so much, sir. Again, you can connect with him through Instagram at Russell Graves and through his website at russellgraves.com. Next week, England-based wildlife photographer Charlotte Rhodes will be here to share images from her favorite place on the planet and talk about her favorite subjects in her presentation, My African Dream. Until next time, go out and create something beautiful. And I hope that we see you again soon.